What's good, folks? My name's Carlos Caban. I'm a data engineer, but I've spent several years as an analyst across several different industries, and I've used Excel for a ton in my past and done a ton of analytics with it. A lot less now since I moved into engineering, but today I thought I'd dig into how to use a couple common Excel functions like the VLOOKUP function, the HLOOKUP function, the SUMIF, its sister function, the SUMIFS function, and the COUNTIF, and its sister function, the COUNTIFS function. So let's go ahead and just dive into how to use these functions, and I'll be sure to link to the sample data so you can do this by yourself and try this out by yourself. So here's our sample data. Let's walk through it initially. So we have candy sales here. We have product ID, we have sales, but you'll notice that we don't have a pretty clean product name. We have product names in the second worksheet where we have product ID mapped with product name, and then we have a city-state worksheet where we have data oriented in a horizontal fashion, and we have maps from city to state. So let's say hypothetically, let's bring in product name into this sheet using VLOOKUP. That's going to be the first function we're going to demo today. So let's do product name. And why would we actually have to bring in product name, for example? Just to make this data make sense. Having totals based off of product ID isn't going to be very helpful. If we bring in product name, we can say that sales were, $100,000 for Kit Kats rather than sales were $100,000 for product CH0 TRI 54,000. That's just not very helpful. So let's go ahead and type is equal to VLOOKUP. And our first value is going to be product ID. This is what we're going to be looking up on the product names sheet. Let's hit comma there. And table array is going to be the data that we're looking up across. We're going to select the entire data set that we want to look up across. We're going to want to select comma, hit comma. And then we're going to want the third value is going to be the column index in the data that we're looking up. So product name's the second column, so we're going to type 2. And then the fourth parameter is going to be whether or not you want an exact or an approximate match. We want an exact match, so we're going to hit false. And you're going to see if I type, if I type Control A to select all the data and do Alt HOI on Windows, we can automatically auto-size all of the columns. So you're going to see that we actually successfully pulled in our data. But one downside or one thing that one bump you might hit is if I select a couple of rows and then could try to drag this data down, you're going to see we're going to start seeing errors. And that's going to be because if you look at the command up here, it says L2 A1 B16. The next one says L3, which is correct. We want this product ID, but it says A2 B17. So we start moving down in the data that we're looking up, and eventually we just start looking up data that doesn't exist. So the goal here is going to be to lock in these row numbers on the product names sheet. Perfect. So if I now select the cells that I want and I hit Control D, which is the same thing as dragging the stuff down, you're going to see that we don't have those errors anymore. So let's go ahead and fill in the entire sheet with product name. Perfect. It works. To add another column here, let's dive in directly into HLOOKUP, which is very similar to VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP letting you look up data in a vertically oriented table, and then HLOOKUP helping you look up data in a horizontally oriented data. Cool. So we'll type state here since we're looking up state, and we're going to do is equal to HLOOKUP. The value we're going to be using is city to look up state, and then we're going to want the table array, which is the data that we want to use to look up our values. Row index, in this case, it's going to be 2 because we want state, which is on the second row. And again, the index starts at 1. And then the range lookup is going to, row index, perfect. And then whether or not we want an approximate or an exact match. And again, we're going to want an exact match here. Cool, perfect. And if I try to fill in the data again using the Control D shortcut, we're going to see the errors. And again, that's going to be because we didn't lock in those row numbers on our target data. So this one was 2, and then this one changed to 3, to 4. Excuse me. 2, 2. We actually only locked in 2, 2. Excuse me. So, so if we were to fill this in now, we have that error. And if we add our $signs and lock in those rows, we actually see that and get resolved. So let's fill in the data. And again, this is the same thing. Using Control D is the same thing as dragging the data down. And why did we add those $signs to lock in these rows? To ensure that once we dragged it down, it didn't go to 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, etc. Cool. So now we have state, now we have product name. Let's do one of these conditional functions. I'm gonna first walk you through. So we're gonna start off with the SUMIF function, but let's walk through the sum and the if function. So the sum function just adds a bunch of numbers together. It's fairly straightforward. Total sales. Cool. Then the if function, which we'll delete after we use it, lets you do some testing. So if this is equal to 2.6, output true. If not, output false. Cool. So because R2 is equal to 2.6, we outputted true. Now the SUMIF function lets you combine both of these functions and lets you conditionally add. So let's say hypothetically we wanted all sales where units were more than 2. We can use the SUMIF function. So let's go ahead and title that column. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's title that column total sales where units more than 2. Cool. So is equal to sum if, and then the range that we want to run our criteria off of. So in this case, it's going to be unit. And then we want to do a comma, quote, because our criteria needs to be within quotes, greater than 2. And then the sum range, which we wanted sales summed. Oh. Equal to sum unit greater than 2. Sorry about that. And then sales. Perfect. So again, this says on unit, run the criteria if it's greater than 2. And if it is, then sum the O column, which is going to be the sales column. Let's actually copy this to this. Perfect. So our total sales are 141,000. Sales, total sales where units were more than 2 is 120,000. So it's a little bit smaller, but the vast majority of our sales were for orders that were greater than 2. So it's only a $20,000 difference of the total sales versus sales where units are more than 2. And now we can do the SUMIF. SUMIFs is very similar to your sum if function. The only difference is that it lets you add multiple criteria. So let's say hypothetically we wanted to do total sales where units more than 2 and profit is greater than 5. We can do is equal to sum ifs and then the sum range. So the order of the parameters are a little different. So your sum range is going to be sales since we want sales added. Criteria range is going to be units for your first one since we want to reenact the first criteria, comma, then double quote greater than 2 to reenact our previous criteria. And then now we're on to the second criteria. And we could add as many criteria as we'd like in the SUMIFs function. We're only going to use 2 today. We're going to do where profit, comma, is greater than 5. And then we're going to close our parenthesis there. So what we should find here is that it is going to be less than the 120,000 since we're adding additional criteria to our sum function. And these criteria are done using and, it's not or. So this should be, we have 119,000. So the vast majority of our sales have units more than 2 and gross profit more than 5. It was only about $1,000 less than our total sales were units more than 2. Cool. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to the COUNTIF. And again, this is going to get a little repetitive because they're fairly similar. And you can probably use the naming convention of these functions to kind of infer what they do. So your COUNTIF function, I'm not going to walk you through the count and the if, but the COUNTIF conditionally lets you count. Let's actually see total number of transactions. Cool. So is equal to count. So this is the total number of transactions. And then we're going to add additional criteria to this to this count that'll whittle this number down. So we're going to do total number of transactions where units more than 2. Cool. So it's type equal to. We're going to do COUNTIF. This is going to be a single criteria. We can go ahead and select the entire units column, comma, double quote, greater than 2, and double quote, close parenthesis. Cool. So now we have 6,000 transactions where units are more than 2. Perfect. Let's move on to the COUNTIFs. So you're going to notice actually that for a second, for your COUNTIF, you're going to notice you only have 2 parameters, the column that you want to do criteria on, and the criteria, because we don't want to sum a separate column. We can go ahead and actually count the column that we're doing the criteria on. It lets us exclude that additional column. Perfect. So let's copy this title over, and we're going to do where units more than 2 and profit is greater than 5. I actually edited the wrong cell, so my bad. And profit greater than 5. Cool. So we're gonna do is equal to COUNTIFs again with the s, because we want multiple criteria. We're gonna do units, the entire units column, comma, double quote, greater than 2. That's our first criteria. And then our second criteria is going to be, is going to be gross profit, and we want gross profit where it's greater than 5. Perfect. So that should whittle it down a little bit more. And now we see that we excluded an additional 200 transactions, adding the additional criteria. Cool. So just as a reminder, VLOOKUP, let's walk through that. We're done pretty much. That covers all of the functions we're going to touch on today. Let's go back over the functions that we learned. So we use the VLOOKUP function to look up product name from the product names table because data was oriented in a vertical fashion. We used HLOOKUP to look up state from horizontally oriented data because, not because, but we used HLOOKUP to look up horizontal oriented data. And then we used multiple versions of the COUNTIF and the SUMIF to add additional criteria to your total. So total sales 141. We have total sales where more than 2 units were sold, being 120. And then the third criteria added where profit is equal to 5. We see it whittled the number down to 119 in total sales, where units were more than 2 and profits greater than 5. And again, fairly similarly, in total transactions is 10,000. Total number of transactions where units are more than 2 is 6,000. So we excluded 4,000 rows. And total transactions with units more than 2 and profit greater than 5 is 6,600. So just slightly less than the initial single criteria. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, shoot a comment. Good luck, folks, and I'll be sure to link out to the sample data.